They said it was for the family business, a sure thing, an investment that would secure everyone's future. So I signed the papers, transferred the money, and watched my life savings disappear into their dream while I kept living in mine. But when I found that receipt in the glove compartment 6 months later, I realized the only thing I'd invested in was my own invisibility. That's when I stopped being the wallet and started being the one who decides where the money goes. Before we continue, please like and subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where in the world you are listening from today. The morning I discovered what they'd really done with my money, the coffee tasted like rust. I sat at my kitchen table, the same one where I'd balanced checkbooks for 43 years, staring at a crumpled receipt that had fallen from Michael's jacket pocket when I'd offered to take it to the dry cleaner. 4 nights at the Ritz-Carlton in Miami. Room service charges, spa treatments, a wine bill that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. My son had told me the $90,000 was going toward commercial kitchen equipment for the restaurant they were opening together. His wife Sandra had shown me spreadsheets, profit projections, photos of the perfect location. They'd made it sound like a family legacy in the making, something to pass down to the grandchildren. "Dad, this is our chance," Michael had said, his hand on my shoulder like we were partners. "Your investment will make us all wealthy." I remember how Sandra had nodded, her smile bright as fresh paint. "Think of it as securing your grandchildren's college funds." So I'd written the check, not because I was naive, but because I wanted to believe I still mattered to them, as more than just the man who remembered birthdays and fixed leaky faucets. I wanted to believe that at 72, I could still be part of building something new. The receipt told a different story. While I was eating canned soup and skipping my blood pressure medication to save money, they were celebrating their windfall with champagne that cost more per bottle than I spent on food in a week. I folded the receipt carefully, placed it in my shirt pocket like evidence in a trial I hadn't known I was part of. Then I did something I hadn't done in months. I opened my laptop and checked my bank account. The balance stared back at me like a stranger, $3,247. After 43 years of working construction, after saving every spare dollar, after living carefully and quietly, I had enough money left to last maybe 3 months. The house was silent around me. Margaret had been gone for 2 years now, pancreatic cancer taking her in the same efficient way she'd managed our household budget. The quiet had become my companion, but that morning it felt different, heavier, like the weight of understanding settling into places I'd kept carefully empty. I made another cup of coffee, stronger this time, and sat back down at the table. Through the window, I could see Mrs. Chen watering her garden next door. She waved and I waved back, the same ritual we'd shared for 15 years. Neither of us expecting more than acknowledgement, both of us grateful for even that small proof of existence. My phone buzzed against the table, a text from Sandra. "Thanks again for believing in us, Dad. The restaurant is going to change everything." I stared at the message for a long time. The exclamation point felt like a slap. I didn't reply. Instead, I called my bank. "I'd like to speak with someone about my accounts," I told the woman who answered. "Of course, Mr. Williams. How can we help you today?" "I need to know about opening a new savings account, something separate from my current ones." "Certainly. Are you looking to add an additional account holder?" "No," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "This one's just for me." That afternoon, I drove to a different bank across town. I opened a new account under just my name, transferred the remaining money from my old accounts, and closed them. The young banker, probably around Michael's age, processed everything efficiently. "Starting fresh?" he asked with a polite smile. "Something like that," I replied. On the drive home, I stopped at a diner I'd never been to before. It was the kind of place Margaret would have called too greasy. But the coffee was hot, and the waitress called me Hohen without it feeling forced. I ordered pie I couldn't afford and ate it slowly, tasting apples and cinnamon and the strange flavor of doing something purely for myself. My phone rang, Michael's name on the screen. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to the message in my truck. "Hey, Dad, just wanted to touch base about the restaurant progress. Sandra found this great contractor, but he wants payment up front for the kitchen renovation. I know you've already invested so much, but I was wondering if you might consider another $10,000, just to get us over the finish line. Call me back." I deleted the message without finishing it. Then I drove home and spent the evening doing something I hadn't done in years. making plans that included only me. The next morning, I called my insurance agent and asked about cashing in my life insurance policy. It wasn't much, but it was something. Then I called a real estate agent about putting the house on the market. "Are you sure about this, Mr. Williams?" she asked. "It's a big decision." "I'm sure," I said. "I need to downsize." What I didn't tell her was that I needed to become invisible to my own family before they noticed what else they could take from me. The house sold faster than I expected. A young couple with a baby, their eyes bright with the same dreams Margaret and I once had. I sold it to them for less than market value, not out of charity, but because I liked how they looked at each other when they thought I wasn't watching. Michael called 3 times during the 2 weeks I was packing. I didn't answer. Sandra left voicemails asking if I was feeling okay, if I needed anything, if there was something wrong. I didn't reply to those either. The day I moved out, I left a note on the kitchen counter. "Gone to live somewhere that fits better." The restaurant money was a gift. Don't look for more where there isn't any. I didn't tell them where I was going because I didn't know myself. I just loaded my truck with everything that mattered: Margaret's jewelry box, my tools, a few photo albums, and drove east until the landscape changed and the radio stations played songs I didn't recognize. I ended up in a small town called Millbrook, 3 states away from everything familiar. Population 2,847,000, according to the welcome sign. Big enough for a grocery store and a diner, small enough that strangers noticed each other without prying. I rented a 1-bedroom apartment above a hardware store. The stairs creaked, the radiator clanked, and the window looked out onto a main street where people still walked instead of driving everywhere. The rent was $450 a month. After 40 years of house payments, it felt like freedom. The owner of the hardware store, a man named Pete with hands like tree bark and a smile that didn't ask questions, offered me part-time work after he saw me fixing the loose railing on the stairs without being asked. "You know your way around tools," he said. "Spent my life with them," I replied. "Good. I could use someone who knows the difference between wanting to help and needing to be useful." I started the next day. 20 hours a week, enough to cover my basic needs without touching the money from the house sale. I kept that in the new account, watching it sit there like a seed I wasn't ready to plant yet. Weeks passed like pages turning slowly in a book I finally had time to read. I learned the names of the coffee shop waitress, Helen, the librarian, Mrs. Foster, and the man who delivered my mail, Carlos, who had grandchildren he talked about with the same pride I once felt. Nobody asked about my family. Nobody needed to know why a man my age had moved to their town alone. They just accepted that I was there, that I showed up to work on time, that I said good morning and meant it. One evening, while walking back from the grocery store, I passed a small church with a sign advertising a community dinner. I almost kept walking. Margaret had been the churchgoer between us, but something made me stop. Maybe it was the smell of bread drifting from the open doors, or the sound of laughter that didn't seem to be excluding anyone. I went in, found a seat at a long table next to a woman named Rose, who told me she'd moved to Millbrook after her husband died, because big cities made her feel like a ghost. "You ever feel invisible?" she asked, over meatloaf and mashed potatoes. "I'm learning the difference between being invisible and being free," I said. She nodded like she understood exactly what I meant. That night, I received a text from Michael. "Dad, where are you? We're worried. The house is sold. What's going on?" I stared at the message for a long time. Then I typed back, "I'm where I need to be." He called immediately. I didn't answer. He called again an hour later. Then Sandra called, then Michael again. I turned off the phone and sat in my small apartment, listening to the sounds of a town settling into sleep. Somewhere nearby, a dog barked once. A car door slammed. The radiator clanked its familiar rhythm. For the first time in months, I felt completely at peace. The next morning, Pete mentioned that his nephew was getting married and needed someone to build custom shelving for their new home. "Pays good," he said, "if you're interested." I was. More than that, I was capable. I'd forgotten how it felt to be needed for what I could do, rather than what I could give. The shelving project led to another, then another. Word spread in the way it does in small towns, quietly through nods and recommendations rather than advertisements. I wasn't getting rich, but I was earning respect, and I'd forgotten how much lighter that made my shoulders feel. 3 months after I'd moved to Millbrook, I received a letter. Not a text or voicemail, but an actual letter with my name written in Michael's careful handwriting. "Dad," it began, "I've been trying to understand why you left without talking to us. Sandra thinks you're having some kind of crisis, but I think maybe we're the ones who had the crisis. We used your money for the restaurant, but we also used it for other things, personal things. I'm ashamed to admit that. I'm ashamed that we treated your savings like our inheritance before you were even gone. The restaurant is doing well, by the way. We could pay you back now, with interest, if you'll let us know where to send it." I folded the letter and placed it in Margaret's jewelry box, not because I planned to treasure it, but because it belonged with the other artifacts of a life I'd moved beyond. I didn't reply, not because I was angry, but because I no longer needed their validation or their money. I'd learned to live within my means, and my means had grown to include things that couldn't be deposited in a bank: the satisfaction of work done well, the comfort of neighbors who knew my name, the peace of sleeping in a space I'd chosen for myself. Winter came early that year. Snow fell thick and steady, turning Millbrook into something from a postcard. I bought a small Christmas tree, not because anyone was coming to see it, but because Margaret had always loved the way pine needles smelled in warm rooms. On Christmas Eve, Pete invited me to his family dinner. I almost said no. Habits of solitude die hard, but something in his voice reminded me that generosity offered is different from generosity expected. His family welcomed me like I belonged there. 3 generations around one table, sharing stories and passing dishes and arguing good-naturedly about everything from politics to pie recipes. Pete's granddaughter, maybe 8 years old, asked if I had any grandchildren. "I do," I said, "but they live far away." "Do you miss them?" she asked with the directness that only children can manage. I thought about it carefully. I miss who I thought they were. Pete's wife, Sarah, reached over and squeezed my hand. Sometimes the family we choose feeds us better than the family we're born with. That night, walking home through snow that crunched under my feet like promises being kept, I realized something that surprised me. I was happy. Not content, not resigned, but genuinely happy in a way I hadn't been since Margaret was alive. My phone, which I'd started carrying again, buzzed with messages. Christmas wishes from Michael, Sandra, even the grandchildren. I read them all, felt the familiar tug of what used to be love, then put the phone away. I had learned the difference between missing people and missing the idea of them. Spring arrived like a whispered apology, bringing with it new projects, new faces, new reasons to believe that starting over at 73 wasn't an ending, but a different kind of beginning. Rose from the church dinners had become a friend. She had a garden that needed tending and a porch that needed painting. I had time and skills and the discovery that being useful by choice felt entirely different from being useful by expectation. One evening, while we sat on her newly painted porch drinking lemonade and watching fireflies blink their Morse code messages to the coming dark, she asked if I'd ever thought about moving back. "To my old life?" I shook my head. "That man doesn't exist anymore. What happened to him?" I considered the question seriously. He learned that love without respect is just habit, and habits can be broken. That summer, I received another letter from Michael. This one was shorter. "Dad, we miss you. Not your money, you. Would you consider a visit?" I kept the letter for a week, reading it each morning with my coffee. Finally, I wrote back, "I'm not the same person who signed that check. If you want to know who I am now, you're welcome to visit me." I gave them my address, but didn't hold my breath waiting for an answer. 2 weeks later, Michael's truck pulled up in front of the hardware store. I watched from the window as he sat there for a long moment, probably gathering courage or rehearsing apologies. Then he got out and walked in. He looked older, thinner, like worry had been eating at him. When he saw me behind the counter, his face did something I hadn't seen in years. It relaxed with genuine relief. "Dad," he said simply. "Michael," I replied. We stood there for a moment, 2 men separated by more than distance, connected by something deeper than disappointment. "You look good," he said finally. "Healthy." I nodded. "I feel it. Can we talk?" I glanced at Pete, who was pretending to organize screws in the back aisle. "I get off at 5. There's a diner down the street." That evening, over coffee and pie that reminded me of my first meal in Millbrook, Michael told me the truth about how they'd spent the money, about the guilt that had been eating at him, about how Sandra had finally admitted she'd pushed him to ask for the loan because she'd seen it as free money from a man who wouldn't be around much longer anyway. That's the part that killed me, he said, his voice quiet. Not that we spent it wrong, but that we thought of you as temporary. I sipped my coffee, tasted the bitterness and the strange sweetness underneath. I was temporary. The man I was then, he was already gone. He just didn't know it yet. Are you happy here? Michael asked, looking around the small diner with its vinyl booths and handwritten specials board. I'm free here, I said, and freedom turned out to be more valuable than anything in my bank account. He nodded like he was beginning to understand. The money's still there, with interest, if you want it. I shook my head. Keep it. Use it to build something real this time. What if we want to build something with you? The question sat between us like a bridge neither of us was sure could hold weight. Then you know where I am, I said finally, but I won't be the wallet anymore. And I won't be invisible. Michael stayed 2 days. He met Pete, Rose, Helen at the coffee shop. He saw the shelving I'd built, the small apartment that had become home, the life I'd constructed from nothing but time and choice. On his last morning, he helped me fix Mrs. Patterson's front steps. She was Pete's neighbor and had been dropping hints about needing help for weeks. As we worked, Michael said, I never knew you were this good at building things. I was always this good, I replied, measuring a board for cutting. You just never needed me to be. When the steps were finished, Mrs. Patterson brought us lemonade and thanked us like we'd performed surgery instead of carpentry. This is what I mean, I told Michael as we cleaned up our tools. She sees what I can do, not what I can give. He drove away that afternoon with promises to visit again, to bring Sandra and the kids, to try being a family instead of just playing one. I watched his truck disappear down Main Street and felt something I hadn't expected. Hope. Not hope that things would go back to how they were, but hope that they might become something better. That evening, I called Rose and asked if she wanted to take a drive to the lake. We sat on a bench watching the water reflect the last light of day, and she asked what I was thinking about. Second chances, I said, and how sometimes you have to take them for yourself before anyone else can give them to you. She smiled. Sounds like something Margaret would have said. I looked at her, surprised. I'd never mentioned Margaret's name. Pete told me about your wife, about how she died. He said you've been carrying her memory like luggage. I considered that. Maybe I have been. Nothing wrong with luggage, Rose said, as long as you're going somewhere. That night, I took Margaret's jewelry box from my dresser and opened it for the first time since I'd packed it. Inside, along with her wedding ring and the pearl earrings I'd given her for our 20th anniversary, was a note I'd never seen before. In her careful handwriting, Frank, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone and you're finally going through my things. Stop feeling guilty about being alive. Start living like you mean it. I love you enough to want you happy, even without me. I sat on my bed and cried for the first time since her funeral. Not from sadness, but from recognition. Margaret had known before I did that I would need permission to begin again. The seasons changed, and with them, my understanding of what family could mean. Rose and I grew closer, not in the desperate way of people trying to replace what they'd lost, but in the careful way of gardeners tending something they hoped might bloom. She told me about her first husband, about how his death had left her feeling like a half-finished sentence. I told her about Margaret, about the guilt I'd carried for outliving her, about the way I'd let that guilt make me smaller and smaller until I'd almost disappeared entirely. We're not trying to replace anybody, she said one evening as we worked in her garden, pulling weeds that had grown bold in the summer heat. We're just trying to be whole again. I understood what she meant. Margaret would always be part of me, but she wouldn't want me to stop living because she couldn't, and Rose's husband would always be part of her story, but that didn't mean her story had to end with his death. By autumn, we were spending most of our time together. I'd helped her winterize her house, and she'd helped me learn to cook for more than one person again. Small things, but they felt significant in the way that building always does. One board at a time, one nail at a time, until suddenly you're looking at something that didn't exist before. Michael visited twice more that fall, once with Sandra. She was quieter than I remembered, more careful with her words. Over dinner at Rose's house, she insisted on hosting. Sandra apologized again. I don't think I understood what we were taking, she said. I saw the money, but I didn't see the trust. The money was just money, I replied. The trust was everything. She nodded, and I could see she was trying to understand the difference. That Christmas, they all came to Millbrook. Michael, Sandra, and the grandchildren, Emma, now 16, and Jake, 13. I watched them explore the town, meet my neighbors, see the life I'd built from nothing but necessity and stubbornness. Emma spent an afternoon with Rose, learning to knit. Jake helped Pete in the hardware store, his eyes wide with interest, as Pete showed him how different tools worked. Neither of them asked why I'd left or when I was coming back. They seemed to accept that this was where their grandfather lived now, and it was different, but not wrong. On Christmas Eve, we all went to the community dinner at the church. I watched my family sit among the people who'd become my chosen family, sharing food and stories and laughter. Michael seemed amazed by how easily everyone accepted us, how quickly conversation flowed, how no one needed to perform or impress. "It's like a Norman Rockwell painting," Sandra whispered to me, as we watched Jake help serve pie to some of the older residents. "It's like life," I replied, "when you stop complicating it." That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Michael found me sitting on Rose's front porch, looking out at snow falling like confetti in the streetlights. "Are you glad we came?" he asked. "I'm glad you wanted to," I said. "That's not the same thing, but it's a start." He sat down next to me, and for a while we just watched the snow accumulate on the railings, covering the familiar world in something clean and new. "I've been thinking about what you said last summer," he said finally, "about respect and love." I waited. "I think I loved you the way I loved the house I grew up in, just there, solid, something I could count on but didn't have to think about." I nodded. "And now I see you," he said, "really see you, and I like who you are." The snow kept falling, covering the familiar world in something clean and new. In the morning, there would be shoveling to do, coffee to make, another day of the life I'd chosen rather than the life I'd inherited. But for that moment, sitting next to my son, who finally saw me as a person rather than a provider, watching snow transform the ordinary world into something beautiful, I felt exactly where I belonged. Spring brought changes I hadn't expected. Rose and I decided to get married, not because we needed to make anything official, but because we wanted to celebrate what we'd built together. The ceremony was small, held in the same church where we'd first met over meatloaf and mashed potatoes. Michael walked Rose down the aisle because her son lived across the country and couldn't make the trip. Pete stood as my best man. Emma played guitar. She'd been taking lessons and wanted to contribute something special to the day. It wasn't a love story from the movies. We were too old for drama, too wise for pretense. It was something better. A partnership between two people who'd learned that starting over isn't about forgetting the past. It's about refusing to let the past define your future. The night before the wedding, as I was packing up my small apartment to move into Rose's house, our house now, I found the original receipt that had started everything, the one from the Ritz-Carlton that had shown me where my money really went. I almost threw it away, then changed my mind. Instead, I tucked it into Margaret's jewelry box, not as evidence of betrayal, but as proof of transformation. A reminder that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you turns out to be the first step toward the best life you never knew you could have. At the wedding reception, held at Pete's farm because Rose wanted something simple and real, Emma asked me a question that made me understand how much had really changed. "Grandpa Frank," she said, "when I'm old like you, how will I know if I'm living the right life?" I looked at this girl who was just beginning to discover who she might become, and gave her the only answer I knew to be true. "When you stop asking other people's permission to be happy." She smiled, and in that smile, I saw something that made every dollar lost, every bridge burned, every comfortable lie abandoned, worth it. I saw a young woman who would remember that her grandfather had taught her that it's never too late to choose yourself. The restaurant that Michael and Sandra had built with my money became successful. They paid me back the full amount plus interest, as promised, but by then I didn't need it. Rose and I used it to establish a small scholarship fund for local high school students who wanted to learn trades, carpentry, plumbing, electrical work, skills that would always be needed, that couldn't be outsourced or automated away. "Dad always said the best investment is in what people can do with their hands," Michael told the local newspaper when they wrote about the scholarship. I was proud that he remembered something I'd tried to teach him, even if it had taken him 40 years to understand it. 2 years after the wedding, Jake decided he wanted to spend the summer in Millbrook, working with Pete in the hardware store. Sandra was hesitant. She worried about him being so far from home, but Michael convinced her to let him come. "Dad's built something good here," he said. "Maybe Jake can learn from it." Jake arrived in June with 2 suitcases and an eagerness that reminded me of myself at that age, hungry to understand how things worked, to build something with his own hands. Pete took him under his wing, teaching him not just about tools and hardware, but about the satisfaction of honest work, of being needed for what you could do rather than what you could provide. By the end of the summer, Jake had built a bookshelf for Rose's living room, repaired 3 bicycles, and helped renovate the church basement. He'd also grown 2 inches and developed the kind of confidence that comes from knowing you can create something useful from raw materials and determination. "I want to come back next summer," he told me, the night before he was supposed to return home. And maybe after high school, I could go to trade school, learn to be a real carpenter. I felt something shift in my chest, a pride different from anything I'd felt before. Not pride in what I'd given him, but pride in what he'd discovered about himself. "Your parents might have other ideas. About college," I said carefully. "Maybe," Jake replied. "But you taught me that sometimes you have to build your own path." That autumn, Michael called to tell me that Jake had convinced them to let him take shop class instead of a second foreign language. "He says he wants to learn to make things like his grandfather," Michael said, and I could hear the wonder in his voice. "Good," I said. "The world needs more people who know how to fix what's broken." "Is that what you were doing?" Michael asked. "When you left? Fixing what was broken?" I thought about it for a moment. "No," I said finally. "I was learning that some things can't be fixed. They have to be rebuilt from the ground up." Years passed. Jake did go to trade school, became a carpenter, started his own business. Emma went to college, but came to visit every summer, bringing friends who marveled at the quiet life Rose and I had built. Michael and Sandra's restaurant thrived, and they opened a second location. They never asked me for money again. I grew older, as did Rose, but we grew older together, which made all the difference. We traveled a little, not grand tours, but small adventures. A week in the mountains, a long weekend by the ocean, places where we could walk slowly and notice things. When Rose had her first heart attack at 78, I was the one who called the ambulance, held her hand in the hospital, made the difficult decisions about treatment. When I had my stroke 2 years later, she was the one who insisted I could recover, who sat by my hospital bed reading to me when I couldn't form words, who brought me home and patiently helped me relearn how to write my own name. "We're taking care of each other," she said one evening as she helped me button my shirt. My fine motor skills never quite returned to what they'd been. "That's what families do." I nodded, understanding something I'd never quite grasped before. Family wasn't just the people you were born to or the people you raised. Family was whoever showed up when showing up mattered. On my 80th birthday, the whole clan gathered in Millbrook. Michael and Sandra, now grandparents themselves. Emma, married to a teacher, with twin boys who climbed on me like I was playground equipment. Jake, successful and confident, with calloused hands and a proud smile. Even some of Pete's family came, and neighbors I'd worked with over the years. As I looked around Rose's living room, our living room, filled with laughter and conversation and the comfortable chaos of people who genuinely enjoyed each other's company, I thought about that morning, 15 years earlier, when I'd sat at my kitchen table staring at a receipt that changed everything. The $90,000 they'd taken had been just money after all. What I'd taken back, my dignity, my purpose, my right to be seen and valued, that had been priceless. But more than that, I'd learned something that money could never teach, that respect, once lost, has to be rebuilt, from the foundation up. You can't demand it or buy it or inherit it. You have to earn it, from yourself first, and then from others. That night, after everyone had gone to their hotels or back to Pete's farm, where some of them were staying, Rose and I sat on our porch swing, listening to the familiar sounds of Millbrook settling into sleep. "Any regrets?" she asked, her hand warm in mine. I thought about it seriously, about the money, the years of being taken for granted, the pain of walking away from people I'd loved, even when they'd stopped loving me back. "Just one," I said finally. "What's that?" "I wish I'd been brave enough to do it sooner." She squeezed my hand. "Maybe you weren't ready sooner. Maybe you needed to be broken before you could rebuild yourself." I nodded, understanding that she was probably right. Some lessons can only be learned at the cost of everything you thought you needed. Some strength can only be found at the bottom of the well you never thought you'd survive. The next morning, Jake found me in the garage, working on a rocking chair I was building for Emma's twins. He picked up a piece of sandpaper and started helping without being asked. "Grandpa," he said, after we'd worked in comfortable silence for a while, "I've been thinking about that story you told me, about leaving everything behind and starting over. What about it? Do you think it's ever too late to do something like that, to change your whole life?" I looked at this young man who carried my genes and, more importantly, had learned my values and felt a surge of hope for his future. "Jake," I said, "the day you think it's too late to start over is the day you've decided to stop living. And that's a choice, not a fact." He nodded, and I could see him filing that away in the place where young men store the wisdom they hope they'll be brave enough to use when they need it. As I write this story now, I'm 85 years old. Rose passed peacefully last spring, in her sleep, after a day spent gardening and laughing with the neighbor children. I miss her every day, but I'm grateful for every moment we had together, every ordinary evening on the porch, every small adventure, every quiet act of love. I still live in our house in Millbrook. Jake visits often, sometimes bringing his own children, my great-grandchildren, who see me as the man who builds things and tells stories and always has time to listen. Emma calls every week, and we talk about books and life and the importance of choosing your own path. Michael and I have found our way to something that might not be the father-son relationship either of us expected, but it's honest and respectful and built on who we actually are rather than who we thought we should be. That's enough. More than enough. The hardware store where I worked for so many years still stands, though Pete retired and his nephew runs it now. Sometimes I stop by, not to work, but to visit, to run my hands over familiar tools and remember the satisfaction of fixing things, of making them work again. People sometimes ask me if I'm bitter about what happened, about the money, about the years I lost being someone I wasn't. I tell them that bitterness is just another form of staying stuck in the past, and I've learned the value of moving forward. The truth is, they didn't take $90,000 from me. They gave me something worth far more. The knowledge that I could survive losing everything and still find reasons to build something new. They taught me that respect is more valuable than money, that dignity is more important than comfort, that being seen for who you really are is worth more than being loved for who others need you to be. I took back something they needed more than money. I took back my own story. I stopped being a character in their narrative and became the author of my own. And in the end, that made all the difference. Thank you for joining me on this journey of loss and discovery, of endings that became beginnings. If this story touched something in you, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. Share in the comments about a time when you had to choose yourself over others' expectations. Sometimes that's the most loving thing you can do, both for yourself and for the people who have forgotten how to see you clearly. Remember, it's never too late to write a new chapter in your own story. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to be invisible any longer. To hear another story of quiet courage and unexpected transformation, click on the playlist showing on your screen now. And remember, your worth isn't determined by what others take from you, but by what you refuse to let them diminish. The best investment you can make isn't in other people's dreams. It's in your own dignity, your own peace, your own right to be seen and valued for who you really are.